I'm Leah Hara and I'll be playing Moderator 1.
I'm Diego Delgado and I'll be playing Moderator 2.
I'm Raul Salinas and I'll be playing Congressman.
I'm Stephanie and I'm going to be playing the Native American.
Today's debate will cover the topics of past conflicts between Native Americans and the government and the Native American movement and their takeover of Alcatraz. Congress will weigh in on how they have tried to minimize the injustices and also talk about current day issues such as the pipeline.
The individual being asked the question will have up to 1 minute to answer, followed by a 30-second commentary by the opposing party. One must refrain from foul language and ill treatment of the opposing party.
That might be hard for some of us.
Do we all agree?
We do.
Okay, let us begin. The first question is for the Native American. Briefly describe the Native Americans' history with the government.
Native Americans are defined as citizens of tribal nations in addition to citizens of the United States. However, we did not have a say in this. We have been subject of cruel treatment and abuse ever since the arrival of immigrants to this country. A variety of laws and policies from the United States government denied basic human rights towards us. When the government finally found it inhumane to murder our children and women, they tried to assimilate us to their benefit. We have constantly been abused, our rights violated, our culture denounced. Although the severity of it has diminished, we continue to be pushed around and have our land wrongfully taken away from us.
Thank you. Congressman, please name and briefly describe the Trio case in which judicial action was taken when concerns between Native Americans and the government arose.
In 1823, there was Johnson versus McIntosh. After Johnson bought land from the tribe Pengsha, McIntosh obtained a patent for the same land. Disputes over whose land it was caused the case. Johnson did not forcefully take the land from the Indians.
But the court ruled in favor of McIntosh. They said the natives had no right to sell the land because they did not own it, and merely had the right of occupancy, if not claimed by Americans.
Please allow the congressman to finish. Go ahead.
Thank you. Continuing there was the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia in 1831, followed by Worcester versus Georgia in 1832. Cherokee Nation versus Georgia found that the Cherokees were domestic dependent nations, rather than foreign nations, and must thereby abide to the laws passed that the natives claimed deprived them of rights. This ruling, however, was short-lived because 1 year later, the Worcester versus Georgia, the Supreme Court ruled that Georgia had no rights to enforce its laws into Cherokee territory.
Yes, 1 year later. This means that in the meantime, multiple states continued acquiring native lands, especially following the court ruling from Cherokee Nation versus Georgia. This gave more Americans initiative to give out and take land. Despite all of these supposed advances, years later in 1887, Congress passed the General Allotment Act, also known as the Dawes Act, which was formed to break up Indian nations to allow them to continue American citizens. We did not want this though, and fought this act over the years. Many may attribute this to assimilation. We did not receive justice until 37 years later in 1924, when Congress passed the Indian Citizen Act, granting Indian American rights without affecting their rights as Native Americans.
Thank you for the input. 3 years later, another tragedy happened. Can you please describe the events leading up to the massacre at Wounded Knee?
The massacre was in response to the ghost dance ritual, which claimed that if an Indian gave up alcohol and lived a simple life devoted to prayer, white men would disappear from the earth, Indian lands would be restored, and dead Indians would rejoin the living. This message of hope was displaced by dance through days of worship. The Sioux Indians, led by Sitting Bull, became very engaged in this form of worship, which drew bad attention from Indian agents. They claimed that the rituals were becoming crazy, and they urged protection immediately. They believed that their display of hope was barbaric.
Thank you. Congressman, please describe the results of Wounded Knee.
Tragic.
I said Congressman. Please?
So Sitting Bull and his grandson were killed. 7th Cavalry opened fire on Sioux encampment at Wounded Knee in Pine Ridge Reservation, killed 146 Indians, 44 women, and 18 children. There were also 25 of the soldiers killed as well.
That's right. This accurately symbolized the death of 19th century Plains Indians culture.
Another eventful controversy in history dealt with the American Indian movement and Alcatraz. Please describe the goals of the Native Americans related to Alcatraz and how the American Indian movement became involved.
In 1969, 89 Indians led by Richard Oates went to Alcatraz Island and declared the former prison as Indian territory by right of discovery. They also wanted the United States to fund a new Native American cultural center and university on the island. The American Indian movement, which was founded a year later in 1968 by young activists, became involved after their ideas were ignored and mocked. This led to protesting on the island for more than 19 months in order to show defiance to the government.
Yes, and many argued that this defiance was wrong. The United States had a federal prison on the island. Just because the prison is closed down doesn't mean one can go and reclaim the land. The United States already had property of the island.
It doesn't feel good to get something taken away from you, does it?
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Congressman, what were the results of Alcatraz?
The leader of the movement, Richard Oakes, left Alcatraz following the death of his daughter. Some followers left with him, and in 1971, the remaining 15 protesters were removed.
Don't forget to mention that the leader, Richard Oates, was shot to death by a YMCA member, Michael Morgan. Also, please mention the court ruling for his murder.
Congressman?
It was ruled as involuntary manslaughter, reason being that Mr. Oakes aggressively approached Mr. Morgan during a confrontation.
Injustice. We were furious. This led to the Trail of Broken Treaties in 1972, which was meant to bring American Indian issues national attention regarding treaty rights and living and housing. It is the largest gathering ever of American Indians presenting their hopes for equal rights. In addition to this, the occupation of Alcatraz marked the beginning of a national Indian civil rights movement.
Thank you all. We will now move on and let Congress weigh in on how they believe to have done their part to live in harmony with Native Americans. Congressman, in relation to the civil rights of Native Americans, in what ways do you feel you have satisfied this issue?
There has been many social and legal revisions in order to accommodate every citizen. The Indian Bill of Rights was enacted. These rights came from a section of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which extends its provisions from the Bill of Rights to Native Americans that are living on reservations, all while following tribal laws. Tribal self-determination was also reinforced by several Supreme Court decisions in the 1970s. This allows Native Americans to govern themselves and make decisions that affect their own people. About 600 tribes were recognized as a result in the early 21st century.
Yes, it all sounds promising, but there are many provisions in the Indian Bill of Rights in which they want us to follow the American ways. For example, our courtrooms must be similar to the federal American courtrooms, meaning we must use evidence for cases as well as pleading. Though we are happy to be advancing and have our issues recognized, there are faults nonetheless.
Is it safe to say that these revisions alone did not satisfy your people?
No, it did not. As I mentioned before, we are happy with our issues coming into concern, but we are not satisfied after all the centuries of abuse. We also sued to protect the tribal rights for water and traditional religious ceremonies. Our ancestors' have performed these ritualistic ceremonies way before we were introduced to laws. Now, peyote and other drugs seem illegal and make it impossible to continue the centuries of old tradition.
Thank you. Okay, for the Congressman, how has education evolved to preserve Native American culture?
There were two separate occurrences regarding education. One in 1978, where Congress provided funds to build a wider variation of jobs and to help preserve the culture of Indians. Another instance was in 1990, in which the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act was passed. This act made museums and universities return sacred Indian objects to tribes that wanted them back.
Yes, after much time and effort trying to acquire objects that were taken away from us, we were happy to finally have them back into our tribes.
In terms of recreational activities, how have the Native Americans gained more control?
We started opening bingo halls, which led to large casinos. It is tribal land, therefore the government should not have the power to rule it illegal. In response, gambling actually became very popular, bringing in a large amount of profit in the entertaining business.
Yes, in 1988, the Supreme Court stated that states must not prohibit the act of gambling if it were done on tribal land. Congress then came up with the Indian Gambling Regulatory Act, which forbids governments from intervening.
Okay. Can you please explain the cultural pride movement?
The cultural pride movement of Native Americans' goal was to preserve culture and languages from disappearing. We did this by encouraging bilingualism and trying to continue the use of tribal rituals. American Indian activists also aim to try to discourage stereotypical nicknames, for example, those that are popularly used in sports.
In addition to your cultural pride movement, we also funded 2 national museums of the American Indian. Another attempt to honor the culture of Native Americans. The National Park Service also changed the name of the park in Montana from Custer Battlefield to Little Bighorn Battlefield.
Thank you both for your cooperation. We'll now move on to current day issues regarding the Native Americans. With President Trump, the debate and rallies regarding the pipeline has sparked controversy. Can you please tell us the issues on both your stands, starting with the congressman?
The pipeline, although it has sparked controversy, is necessary. Just as government has done their part to ease tension with Native Americans, as mentioned before, the natives must also be willing to cooperate and find a medium where we can all live in harmony and will benefit all of us in addition to this country.
It is not about us being uncooperative. It is the fact that you have and continue to take away from us. Yes, admittedly, our relationships have come a long way, but you take 1 step forward and 2 steps back. The past has just consisted of taking and taking from us. Are we, the original founders of America, not even allowed our small land without drilling and manufacturing on it for commercial benefits? We hold it very sacred to us, and you have the vast majority of the nation you could do this on.
Congressman, can you briefly explain the goals of Trump regarding the pipeline and how it relates to the Native Americans?
By the construction of the pipelines, Trump states that we're going to put a lot of steel workers back to work. The pipelines will be made with 100% raw U.S. steel. Trump also states that the construction of the pipelines will bring nearly 28,000 jobs to the United States citizens. It will benefit America as a whole, not just his personal financial interests. Job aside, the pipeline will also carry oil from oil refineries from North Dakota to refineries and pipeline networks in Illinois. It will help economic growth.
Thank you. Can you please describe why this project would harm Native Americans today?
Gladly. Aside from the fact that the government continues to take our land, this project would be hazardous. With the extensive pipeline from North Dakota to Illinois, even a minor leak would damage our water supply. Even before the pipelines are in place, the construction alone will disturb sacred burial and archaeological sites.
Congressman, can you please describe the decision made by Congress in relation to these pipelines?
President Trump assigned executive orders to revive the Dakota Access and Keystone XL oil pipelines. The controversy over the matter continues today.
And we will not stop fighting. We have come a long way since our ancestors first roamed this land, and we will continue to fight for our rights. Thank you.
This concludes today's debate over the Native Americans and Congress. We would like to thank both parties for their cooperation.
Now it's time to test your knowledge with a Kahoot game.